Centurion at Solidarity, or Solidaritate, as it's properly called, with Dirk Hermann, the CEO of Solidarity.
Thank you very much. Welcome here. It's nice to see you.
Well, it's a pleasure. You know, we actually got in contact a couple years ago, and he's busy, I'm busy, and I hadn't realized it'd been 2 years since we last chatted.
Yeah, amazing.
Time goes really fast. Yeah. Well, Dirk, what I want to talk to you today about is about solidarity, obviously, since that's where we're at. But I think a lot of people, especially outside South Africa, don't really understand where this all came from and what it's all about. But when you walk in the door downstairs, and this kind of caught my attention, there's a format that says since 1902.
Yes.
So its roots go back quite a ways. The modern solidarity we'll get to shortly, but 1902, it was a trade union for miners or something like that?
Yeah, it's quite a long history that we have. We were formed in 1902, like you just said. And at that stage, it's quite important here, of course, in the South African history.
The end of the Anglo-Boer War.
The end of the Anglo-Boer War. So the situation was that a lot of the young farmers had to come to the mines after the war because of the scorched earth policy.
They burned everything, farms,
everything. They simply burned everything. Of course, at that time, it was just after the concentration camps. Around about 33,000 women and children died in concentration camps.
And that's just the Afrikaners, not including the Basotho and the Tswana that were also in the camps with them.
It was much, much bigger than that. And so the Afrikaners sat with a dilemma on how to deal with this absolutely tragic events after the war. So they had two choices. The one was to say that let's stand up via the empire. Because of course the empire said that, well, we will help, we will support you and so on. There's just one thing.
The British Empire.
The British Empire. But there's one thing, then you must become British. And
one small detail.
Yeah, so we've decided not to take that route. We've decided to do it ourselves. So Afrikaners then, after 1902, started to form institutions, and they then took self-responsibility. It was a very difficult time because absolute poor circumstances, the economy that was in an absolute state, the post-war depression, etc. And then Afrikaners said, well, let's form things ourselves. Mm-hmm. So they started with schools, they started with institutions.
Would a good term for that be self-bestuur?
Self-bestuur, yeah, self-bestuur, that's correct. Ons self, we will do it ourselves. And then one of the institutions that was formed, of course, was the Transvaal Miners Association. The Transvaal Miners Association originally actually were formed in the mining industry and was predominantly English. And but the young Afrikaners became part of that, and later on it became predominantly Afrikaans. So we were formed as in that period of time. And to understand as today, the solidarity and the bigger solidarity movement, you have to understand that specific time. We call it the time between the republics. The old Zuid-Afrikaans Republic that we've lost, and the Orange Free State Republic, we've lost them after the war, and then between the big republic of 1961. So there was a period of time that we call between the republics. So what did Afrikaners did in a stage when they did not have a state? They took self-responsibility. So after the World War II, and they started with the so-called help mekaar beweging, help each other movement, and then they formed institutions like, for instance, the insurance company Sanlam, that's today still one of the biggest in the world. They've started Santam, they started Volkskas at that stage. Today it's one of the big banking groups, ABSA. So that was all started in that period between the republics, where Afrikaners say that we take self-responsibility. And then came 1961, the period of apartheid. And then in that specific period, Afrikaners to an extent lost that self-responsibility.
It became more dependent on the state.
Became much more dependent on the state. And then came 1994. And after 1994, Afrikaners had to ask, but what now? Now we are suddenly a minority in a majority environment, but we are not just a normal minority, we are a discredited minority. And a very visible minority.
Yeah, you kind of stand out.
and an overperforming minority.
Yes.
And that's not a nice recipe.
No, it's a bad recipe for jealousy and distrust.
It's absolutely a dangerous recipe. So what we've done then is Flip Base became the General Secretary of the then Transvaal Miners Association.
So it was still called that?
Well, actually, Mine Workers Union.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. The Mine Workers Union. It was called the Mine Workers Union in 1997. And then Flip Base became the General Secretary of the Mine Workers Union. And in the Congress of 1997, he gave his first speech as General Secretary, and he said that we must build a movement much bigger than the trade union. And the reason for that is we could actually see that the ANC at that stage does not have a governing ideology. They have a struggle ideology.
Yes.
So that means that we can expect...
Well, they have a new ideology now. It's called kleptocracy.
That's quite the same. It's not that new.
No, it's not original.
It's not original.
Mugabe did a good job at it before they did.
So how do we react then on that if we know what comes? Remember at that stage there was a kind of euphoria around South Africa.
In 94.
In 94,
in fact,
97.
people ask me all the time on my program, especially a couple of years ago when I first became known in South Africa, people are like, well, is America going to help South Africa? Is someone going to help us in South Africa? And I said, folks, you have to understand, time stopped for the world with South Africa on April 27th, 1994. Yes. We've solved the problem in South Africa, and everybody looks at South Africa in Europe, in Japan, in the West, through the lens of April 27th, 1994.
Absolutely so.
10-kilometer queues to vote for the first time.
Absolutely so.
Yeah.
And there was Nelson Mandela, the spirit of Nelson Mandela. There was the Rugby World Cup.
Ubuntu, all that stuff.
And we've won the Rugby World Cup, and Mandela wore the rugby jersey.
Yeah. And he's out there with Francois Pinard, arm in arm.
Absolutely. It was just amazing.
It's all going to be wonderful.
Absolutely. The Rainbow Nation happened. But we knew it's not that.
Going to be that way.
Because we could see, well, it's very easy. You just look at the ideology and you look at the history of their ideology, and then you know what's going to happen. So what to do then? So Flip gave a speech, and at that stage the old Mine Workers Union was literally bankrupt. And we sat here with a bankrupt organization. That's also the year when I started also in 1997 there. And we sat with a bankrupt institution in a euphoria about South Africa. And then Flip came and said, listen, what we can expect is that the state is going to weaken. We're going to see more aggression against minorities. And we must build a movement to take self-responsibility. And then we went back to that period between the republics.
Between the republics, yeah.
And we say that let's take that ons self, take self-responsibility, and we start to build institutions. And then we started to build, literally to build. So,
well, in fact, in Solidarity is really like an umbrella organization with many different parts underneath.
Yes, what we've done is Flip announced that we must become a movement. And then we've changed Solidarity, the trade union, we've changed the name, we call it Solidarity. And partly because of Solidarność in Poland, the trade union of Lech Walesa, we took a bit from them. We went to and look at the Israeli trade union and say that they took self-responsibility, built a thing, they built a facto reality that later on get the Jure recognition in the form of a state, Israel. And we look at the German trade unions for training purposes. We went to the American carpenter trade union. They do amazing work on training and development. And we took all of that and we started to build a movement. So what we first done is we've rethinked the trade union, Solidarity, and we say that we must start to focus on training development. We must build training institutions. So we started then with a technical college and called Saltec.
Yep.
And
I'll be there tomorrow.
You're going to go to Saltec. It's it's a beautiful place.
Yes.
I think one of the most beautiful campuses in the world at this stage.
Well, that's all fascinating, but what I found fascinating is it was built during lockdown. It was built on time and under budget.
Absolutely so. And it was financed by
donations.
10 Rand donations of Solidarity members and the public.
That's crazy.
It's an absolute amazing story. If you go there tomorrow, you will stand there in this technical college and you will feel something is alive. And the reason why that is alive is because everything that's built there has a name of someone on it.
Fair point.
Because someone donated it. Thousands and thousands ordinary Afrikaners built that institution. The second thing that we've built was the Solidarity Helping Hand, because we said, we must support people that's in need. And we started with that. And then we started with AfriForum, that takes responsibility for civil rights, for safety, for municipalities, etc. And then we started to build a university, Academia. Today, Academia has already 3,000 students. We are now in the process to build a new campus here in the east of Pretoria, 1.8 billion Rand project. That is going to be a beautiful, beautiful campus for 6,000 students.
Wow.
Now we are in the process to build our first school, primary and secondary school.
That's some serious self-responsibility there.
Absolutely, because the fact of the matter is, at this stage, Afrikaans is still a recognized language in South African schools, but the fact is they're going to phase it out.
They're certainly trying. They've done a Stellenbosch.
Yeah, of course, yes. That's just logical what's going to happen. So we have to take self-responsibility for our schools as well. The reason for that is very simple, not only because of language, it's also because of values.
And culture.
Values and culture. So we plan then to roll out a school franchise in the next couple of years, and that also will really inspire people. And then we've realized that we must build an alternative media. So we've started with Marula Media. Marula Media are now the biggest Afrikaans media online platform, and an absolute success. And then we've also made sure that we take responsibility for cultural issues. The Federation of Afrikaans Cultural Associations then became part of the bigger movement. And
does that include like the Voortrekker Monument and the Blood River?
Yeah. We have a management responsibility of the Voortrekker Monument and Blood River, etc. In short, there's much more. We started to build a whole movement that takes self-responsibility. Just when we started in 1997 with the old Mine Workers Union, we had around about 20,000 paid up members. Now the movement in its whole has 570,000 paid up members.
That's quite a few.
We were literally bankrupt in 1997. Now our operational budget is for the first time over 1 billion Rand. And of course, we are now looking to build a campus, a capital project of 1.8 billion Rand.
That's a lot.
So that is what we've decided to do, and we've then took all of this and we've bind it together, and we call that now the Solidarity Movement. It was formed by Solidarity, but it's not Solidarity only anymore. So we still have the trade union that takes responsibility for everything around work. We now form what we call, it's actually the old European guilds, that we form guilds for the different occupational categories in South Africa.
Journeyman, master.
Absolutely, yes. And so that's still the responsibility of the trade union, something totally different than original trade unions, but we've built all these institutions through which we can live. Now, we go quite regularly to Europe, and if I look at Europe and what's happening there, I think solidarity and the solidarity movement and what we do here is actually the future for them.
They certainly need to turn their back on socialism. Their quasi-socialist states are definitely challenged there. Dirk, I want to take a moment to pause here just a second to check on my audience, folks. Be patient with us. Let me just check and see if we're still live. Make sure we're good here. Since I don't have someone working the camera with me, we do. We have a good sized audience.
Oh, great.
Yeah, excellent. So we're still live. Sometimes the Wi-Fi or the network goes out. Next thing you know, Usually I have 2 cameras, I have a backup, but this time just the one. This is the better quality phone. So yeah, it's fascinating what you talk about. Let me shift gears for a second, okay? A little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay, so Hermann, that sounds like a German surname.
Hermann is a German surname.
Okay, so I got that right.
So,
like many Afrikaners, you have German background.
Yes,
But
my daughters are now the 12th generation in South Africa.
Oh wow!
So our first forefather came here in 1657.
Okay.
And he was a free burger. So
Free citizen.
A free citizen. So the thing, what's important about Afrikaners is to understand that I'm here for the 12th generation. I've challenged Julius Malema once in an open letter because he had this issue that we are not Africans and we are not from Africa, etc., etc. And I've challenged him. I said, well, if you can show me 12 generations in the southern tip of Africa as Julius Malema, and I can show you, I can give you everyone's name.
Birth date and family past.
I can give you everything. Try to do that. You can't. So we are here in Africa. We are from Africa. And although we have strong Western values, so we are proud Westerns in Africa. So 12 generations here. And we did not come here as Africans. And that's a big difference than other colonial countries. They came here as a European nation, Belgians or French or English or Portuguese, and then they could go back to their motherland. We can't.
You came here to be part of Africa.
Yeah, because we came here and we've become Afrikaners here. And we called ourselves after the continent.
Yes, exactly.
And our language is after the continent. And your language was formed here in Africa. I have nowhere to go. Now, that's a powerful thing, a powerful political thing to say that I don't have any alternative. I can only stay here. Well, of course, individuals can immigrate. But the people can't. Afrikaners can't immigrate. So we don't have an alternative, and that's why we're going to stay here, and that is why we built. So the bad news for the ANC government and all the others are, well, we're going to stay here. We're here. We're not going to go anywhere.
Well, Dirk, that's impressive, 1652, but I got you beat. My first immigrant ancestor arrived at the Jamestown colony of Virginia in 1621.
Oh, okay.
My 17th great uncle was Sir Francis Wyatt, the first royal governor of the Jamestown colony.
Okay, all right.
His brother, the Reverend Hout Wyatt, was progenitor. So I always like to do this with Afrikaners because they've been here a long time, but we've been in America longer than they've been in South Africa. By just a little.
Yeah. But there's a difference, eh? I don't think anyone challenged you. Whether you are an American.
No.
Can you believe it? They come here and say, you are not an American. Exactly. But they challenge me. They say, I'm not an African. I'm not from Africa. So they say, I'm a European and must go back. If someone tell you, go back to your mother country, what will you say? Where will you go?
Exactly. Well, and it's especially unique because being an American is not an ethnicity. It's our country is different from a standpoint of being an American is being someone who espouses our laws, our views, our ideals, and all kinds of people can become Americans. It's not an ethnic group.
Yes.
But being an African, and you guys are Africans now, is very different. Very different.
It is definitely different.
Yeah. Okay, so 1650s, German. Okay, we got that sorted out there. So you're also, I believe, well educated. Don't you have a doctorate as well?
Yes, I have a PhD.
Okay.
And I've done my PhD on affirmative action in South Africa.
Oh wow!
And the influence of that on alienation of the non-designated group. Did my master's degree on that as well, and I've done 2 honors degrees, one in personnel psychology and one in industrial sociology.
Those are fascinating topics and seem well suited for what you're doing here.
Yeah. And my B degree was in law. I did a BA law, so I have law, industrial psychology, sociology, etc., and then affirmative action. Well,
the reason I mentioned education is I'm going to get your thoughts. I'm sure I know the answer, but just for the audience's edification, I frequently rail on the Angie Mosheka and the Department of Basic Education, their standards for the matrix. 30, and I frequently get accused of getting it wrong, but factually I'm correct. You only need 30% in 3 subjects to pass, and 40% in your first language to pass. And what they're doing is putting generations of South Africans on the street who are functionally illiterate, incapable of critical thinking, with a piece of paper expecting that they are entitled to a job when they can't function a job. That's my analysis of it. Do you think that's correct? And if so, what are your thoughts about what that does to the future of South Africa?
Well, it's an absolute crisis. The answer for the future, of course, in the knowledge economy is more knowledge. So we are not in the industrial economy anymore.
No, the fourth generation.
Absolutely no. We are now in the
information age.
In the information age, and therefore you must be on the forefront of knowledge. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the rate that knowledge is doubling, then it's every 18 months there's doubled the amount of knowledge that there was before the 18 months. So they talk
crazy.
about in a couple of years it will be every 18 hours. So the fact is knowledge. Everything is about knowledge. And I'm afraid South Africa simply does not understand that. The fact of the matter is 75% of the South African schools are dysfunctional at this stage.
Yes,
75%.
Absolutely. Instead of fixing education, which is what they should have done, because if we're fair, we go back to the pre-94, most white South Africans had a very good shot at education, and some other South Africans did. But instead of fixing all the schools, they made all of them weaker.
Of course, yes. And that is that's the problem of the ideology of absolute equality. It became sameness.
But the problem is equality of outcomes, not equality of opportunity.
Yes.
And that's which is fair.
So they believe that you must centralize and then redistribute so that everyone can be equally poor.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we are an equal society, and then we are satisfied.
Be grateful for your 350 Rand SASSA grant, which will get you 3 Streetwise KFCs and a T-shirt.
So we've decided as solidarity. Remember, we are just a worker organization.
Yes.
There's a lot of course, and that's also a bunch of nonsense. But there's a lot of critique against white monopoly capital, etc. That's not us. And I think they are wrongly called white monopoly capital.
It's a label that was used.
It's a label. But the fact of the matter is, we are ordinary South Africans. We are ordinary Afrikaners, and it is we started the whole movement from blue collar workers in the mining industry, factory workers, etc. And what did they do? They've realized, as blue collar workers, here are some of them, photo of them. There's typical members of ours that realized that we must do something for the next generation. And this ordinary mine worker said, every one of us will give it 10 Rand per month to build knowledge institutions. And then we started to build the technical college, the schools, the university, etc. Because we take responsibility for knowledge, because we know we are now in the information and knowledge era. And at the end of the day, Afrikaners in South Africa will still perform because of knowledge, not because of a paradigm of discrimination still exists in South Africa. And they will come and say, what's happening here? Afrikaners are still performing. And we must have stricter discrimination laws, because, of course, we are the most racialized society in South Africa, institutionalized racism in laws.
Yeah.
So the fact is, and now what we do is we equip yourself with knowledge, and then they say, you are performing, thus stricter laws against you. And that's a bit of the challenges that we sit with.
No doubt. But what's really frustrating, I think, from my perspective, for South Africa as a whole, not just for Afrikaners, but for the whole country, is the propensity or the desire for so many South Africans who have skills to leave. They're all looking for off-ramps. Black, white, colored, Indian, they're trying to get out of here. Between the insecurity, the rapes, the murders, the cash in transit ice, the load shedding, the racist laws, the potholes, the uncertainty of everything, it's very frustrating time to be a South African. But I suppose in some respects, with the approach that you take, your organization, with the self-bestuur, the self-reliance, that maybe it's also a great time to be South African if you have hope for the future and you want to take on responsibility.
Absolutely. We've said about these, some call it the fourth industrial revolution, the new knowledge economy. But what the power of that is, that communities are empowered through new technology to take more and more self-responsibility, and the national state is weakening all over the world, but in South Africa as well. So that means that with new technologies, we get answers for problems that we thought in the past, the only answer for that problem lies in the state. It's not so anymore. If you take even the energy crisis in South Africa, new technologies around energy is going to make it possible for us as community to take self-responsibility for energy outside the boundaries of the state. It's if you look at the kind of technology that we use as solidarity in our school that we develop now, it's amazing what we can do. We're going to have a better educational offering as the state that the state has right now at quite the same prices than the state can offer now. And that is because of new technologies. If you look at...
well, and also you're not stealing any of the money.
Of course. And so you can take everything. Answers are coming for communities, and we take that up. And then you can build here a future in South Africa outside the boundaries of the state through self-responsibility. And then if you look at that, South Africa is not that bad place to live at this stage. You look at the bigger economic world out there, the geopolitical world out there. If you look at America, China, Europe, Australia, etc., and you ask, well, where do you think you must position yourself? Then South Africa is not a bad place. We have a bad government, but our location is not that bad. And if you then come in a position where you take self-responsibility as a community, and you can do that via technology, then you can build a prosperous future here in South Africa, despite of the current state situation.
That makes sense. And I empathize with South Africans who want an off-ramp, but my experience is with most South Africans who have looked for greener pastures in New Zealand or Australia or the UK or even the US, oftentimes wish they could come back.
Well, we experienced that.
They miss, it's South Africa's a very unique place. You mentioned something a little bit ago before we wrap up, and I think that we should talk about this, is that roll the clock back 7 years ago, and all the pundits and all the academics were talking about the erosion of state sovereignty. In no small measure because of social media and how citizens could organize protests instantly, could rise up against the state, and they brought up Iran, but of course the state crushed those things. And so the ability to move money from place to place, and then you have cryptocurrencies, and you also have banking, all these different things, and multinational corporations that can move their flag anywhere they want, to the Guernsey Island, Jersey Islands, to the Bahamas, the Caymans. The argument was that states were losing their sovereignty, and I agree with that to a degree. But I said the states retain the sole monopoly on the use of force. People have to remember that.
Unfortunately.
And unfortunately. And they retain courts and things like that, which can put harmful sanctions on you. So I think the lockdown that we saw that took place in South Africa just shows you just how much power the state has, even when they're not well run.
Yeah.
We saw what happened in South Africa with 250,000 people arrested for violating lockdown rules, not laws. And it's crazy, but we can do things outside the state, but we still have to recognize that the state is there.
Yeah, you see, the thing is, the interesting thing is the state weakens, but the government gets stronger.
Yeah, isn't that, especially in South Africa?
Yeah, especially. And the less they can do, the more power do they want to have. So, and that is, of course, the challenge that we have. And that is a challenge that we must overcome. So the fact is, of course, we take self-responsibility. We built our own institutions. Unfortunately, it can't be in absolute isolation with the state. So we have also a relationship with the state, and we must have that relationship with the state. We function within the bigger parameters of the state, and we do a lot to make sure that we have a relationship with the state as well. But the fact is, the only answer, I think, worldwide is to take, as communities, much, much more self-responsibility. And that is exactly what we do.
Well, that involves people doing something, and these days that seems to be a challenge.
Yeah, that involves people doing something. The problem that we have is if you refer to social media and people that can actually mobilize against the state, etc. But the problem is with those kind of actions, a lot of time, you do that in relation with the state. So what you actually want is a better state.
Yeah.
So you mobilize against a better state. You litigate against a better state. You litigate for a better state. You mobilize against. And what we say is, no, wait. Maybe there's a better alternative. Maybe there's a better alternative. And we, of course, litigate against the South African government. In fact, we're going to file papers tomorrow morning against the new state of emergency.
Thank you.
And I think we have a good chance to win. So we will litigate and mobilize against the state. But what we also do is to say we must also set alternative structures outside the state parameters. So we are not only defined by state.
Sure.
We also build alternatives.
Gotcha. But I'll tell you, that's a pretty good gig if you can get it. Let's see, I'll destroy the national parastatal that provides electricity, one that once produced 42% of all commercial power in sub-Saharan Africa for a population on the continent then of 750 million below the Sahara, country 34 million, to a country today that can't keep the lights on. And then I'll use that as an excuse to usurp power from people by coming up with the unelected National Electricity Command Council, no doubt headed by Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. And maybe she could tell us about how people's all, you know.
Absolutely.
But it's a good gig. You create the crisis and then you usurp power.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're taking them to court. I'm sure that others are going to take them to court too. Maybe they can join up with you. But it's really, it's a frustrating thing, I'm sure, for South Africans. Dirk, you've been very kind with your time this morning. Before we wrap up, I'd like to ask if you have any final thoughts you might want to share with the viewers, or any hope or anything that's coming down the pike that they might want to know about from Solidarity's perspective.
Yeah, I think the most important thing from the Solidarity's perspective is that we are in South Africa. We are in the southern tip of Africa, and we see ourselves a future here on Africa's soil, on the southern tip of Africa, but not like it is now. So we gonna stay here, we're gonna build here, and that is the power of community, and that's the power of a cultural community that say that let's take self-responsibility. We build a future where we are. I think a lot of things that we do here is things that the rest of the world is going to be confronted with in the future.
Maybe they should be paying attention to what you're doing.
I think so. If I look at the immigration figures and the change of democracy in especially Western Europe, also in America, I think the countries in the future is going to have maybe problems, and they will come back and, well, don't worry, we will show you how.
Show you the path. Dirk Hermann, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, Dankie, for your time.
Dankie.
Okay, let me shut down, folks.